Joining us now for World Brief and the review of some of the headlines of today's newspapers from around the world is Adefemi Akinsanya. Good morning, Adefemi. How are you?
Dr. Ruben, I'm okay, thank you. Good morning, Vimbai.
Good morning, Adefemi.
Welcome back, Rufai. How are you doing?
Morning, Femi. Yeah.
Rufai, we have 3 days until Ileao.
Yeah,
3 days. 3 days, and then 5 days until Judoba.
Yes, sir.
Counting down one by one. Let me tell you what's happening around the world. Now, the suspect in that Colorado petrol bomb attack has been charged with 16 counts of attempted murder. Mohammed Solomon Sabri is accused of throwing Molotov cocktails and using a makeshift flamethrower on a group of people at a rally in support of Israel or Israeli hostages. Now, this is with the FBI describing the incident as a targeted act of terrorism. Now, the 45-year-old from El Paso County in Colorado shouted "Free Palestine" during the attack, and that is still what is being alleged. Now, a total of 12 victims were injured and taken to hospital, authorities say. Now, one of those was at one point said to be in a critical condition. A federal criminal complaint said that Soliman confessed to the attack, told investigators that he had planned it for a year, and said that he wanted to kill all Zionist people and wished that they were all dead. He also said that he would do it again. Now, on the 1st of June, more than 100 Ukrainian drones struck air bases deep inside Russia, targeting nuclear-capable long-range bombers. Now, the scale of the operation, dubbed Spiderweb, became clear almost as soon as it began, with explosions reported across several time zones all over Russia. It is believed that the drones were smuggled into Russia inside wooden cabins, mounted on the back of lorries, and concealed below remotely operated detachable roofs. Now, the lorries were then apparently driven to locations near air bases by drivers who were seemingly unaware of their cargo. Then the drones were launched and set upon their targets. Meanwhile, negotiations between Ukrainian and Russian delegations in Istanbul ended without agreement on a ceasefire on Monday, but with both sides still agreeing to exchange more prisoners. Now, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who was not there, said that the two states had agreed to exchange 1,000 prisoners of war each, with the possibility of swapping an additional 200 prisoners of war. He said an agreement had also been made to return the remains of killed service personnel, but added that this would take careful preparation. That the heads of the Russian delegation, Vladimir Medinsky, specifically did confirm that only it had received a list of 339 names of people Ukraine wanted returned, but it did not comment on anything further. That's your story, Dr. Your thoughts before we move on to newspapers?
Okay, so a couple of things. I totally condemn the hate crime against those people out there in America by Solomon.
Yes.
And in fact, it's even been found out that he's got a legal status.
Yes.
So that's another problem.
Yes.
That's like red meat for Trump. He's
Yes.
going to be very
already
happy.
come out and say that.
So he's going to be happy
came in
and all
under
of
Biden.
that. You came in under Biden and all of that. So, which I don't think should be the conversation, but I condemn what he's doing because, see, you cannot say free Palestine and hurt Israelis because not every Jewish person is in support of what Benjamin Netanyahu does. And we see that every day. There are protests against Benjamin Netanyahu in his own country. So you can't tie everybody with one brush. It's not done. You yourself, you have a lot of evil in you to be able to do that. And we must state that every time.
Absolutely.
I think the full course of the law should take effect. He should be made to suffer for what he has done. As regards Ukraine, what Ukraine did was called Operation Spiderweb. One of the most audacious one. They attacked the Tupolev plane. The Tupolev plane have been in service for the Russians. They have strategic bombers, you know. It also could carry some of their nuclear arsenals. You know, it's sort of like the replica of the B-52s of the Americas. So they attacked the fleet across various stations where you had this Tupolev plane, the Tupolev, the Tu-190 and the likes, the Tu-95 and, you know, some other things in the arsenal there. What they did was pretty much, you know, you remember the pager attack of the Israelis on Hezbollah?
Yes.
Exactly, replica. They hid these drones in this cache, and once the truck drove into Russia, they opened them up and they pulled them apart. The Ukrainians said they hit about 34% of the Russian fleet. The Russians also are reporting otherwise because, during war, there's going to be a lot of propaganda.
Course.
They said for them that they fought back and they didn't hit most of their Tupolev, that some of the attacks were repelled. They brought down the drones and everything. But this is a big plus for Ukraine. While the conversation is still going on, while the conversation went on in Turkey in the course of yesterday, and based on that, they had some, understanding. Prisoner swaps. Anyway, they've always done prisoner swaps at every interval. If you remember, some of the officers at Zaporizhzhia, there was some prisoner swap a couple of years back while the war started. So they're saying 6,000, dead prisoners. Some of these prisoners between the age of 25 soldiers across board, but they've not still been able to agree upon a ceasefire. Russia had been pounding Ukraine all this while. Ukraine will feel that this is a very good retaliation. It's really hit Russia deep, and it will make Russia start to rethink what they really have as regards their defense. And I know the Korean election is still on. We're watching that with bated breath.
Yes.
After all of the
shenanigans,
that happened.
Thank you.
I mean, this is, for me, I'm extremely concerned because I feel that this is definitely a massive escalation. The level of covert operation that Ukraine was able to successfully execute is something that needs to be studied. Because if you listen to how they were able to hide those drones inside the cabin truck and get that through, this is probably the deepest attack within Russian territory during this war. And they say that it took several months to plan and execute this type of attack. Now, for me, what's the biggest concern? The biggest concern is not so much the Russian retaliation, but the reports around how much cheaper in price it is to manufacture the type of drones that were used in this attack than it is to manufacture our usual weapons. Now, if they're now able to manufacture drones that have, what was the success rate? About 30% success on this scale of attack inside some of Russia's strongholds for around $1,000 or whatever the cost may be in that region. I need to confirm. It's a very scary development for global security. Now, secondly, do we know who was complicit, whether covertly or overtly in this? Of course, Putin is already alleging that the West must have been involved. Is it possible for this type of covert operation to have happened without assistance from various allies? Now, what does that mean? That means that the negotiations between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin will also go cold because Vladimir Putin will feel like it's not being done in good faith. So the complexities are huge, and I just pray that Russia's response isn't going to be the type of response that's going to impact the whole world, because we know that we're dealing with somebody who's somewhat of a loose cannon when it comes to responding to this type of aggressive attack on his territory. So I just hope that this doesn't pull the whole world into what's happening.
Okay. The story about Russia and Ukraine, the story you brought is about Operation Spiderweb by the Ukrainian military. 1,000 drones attacking 5 locations, 5 major regions in the south and the east of Russia. And it caught the Russians, wrong-footed by surprise.
Yes.
Okay, however, the major issue is about peace, ceasefire. You recall that President Trump had said that the two parties should come together. And Marco Rubio also echoed that otherwise the United States would withdraw. J.D. Vance also echoed that. Now, there was a meeting yesterday in Istanbul, the capital of Turkey, where Russian and Ukrainian negotiators met, but there was no progress. The clear thing between Ukraine and Russia, and since the beginning of hostilities in February 2022, is that both parties are not ready for peace. No negotiation, concrete negotiation, has been arrived at. What happened yesterday was that both of them agreed to exchange prisoners of war and dead bodies, 2,000 of them, and also, underage, persons under the age of 25. That was the only thing that came out yesterday. Russia says it's ready to release 6,000 persons by next week. Ukraine did not give any definite date. However, Ukraine is insisting. that Russia does not want this war to end. Why? Because Ukraine says it will never agree to an unconditional, it will never take a conditional ceasefire. Ukraine wants 30 days of ceasefire, during which there will be freedom, land, air, and sea. Russia says that is not possible. And Russia has put on the table, state media in Russia is saying that Ukraine has to reduce the size of its military. Ukraine has to move out of the occupied territories in the southeast of Russia. 3, Russia is saying it has a right to regions like Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia, and that it will hold on to the southern area of Crimea, which it annexed in 2014. Good. And Ukraine is saying this is not possible. However, the only thing here is Trump is now saying, okay, he's willing to be a third party to the negotiation and meet with both Zelensky and Putin, at a place of their choice. But the issue is that, the end of the war is not clear. Russia wants to hold on to territories. It even says Ukraine must never think of joining any military alliance, and its military should be entirely demobilized. So this is the state of the conflict between those two countries. Very quickly, the gentleman Mohammed, who has now been 45-year-old Egyptian, who has now been charged. His former charge will be on Thursday. He's been charged for assault, for attempted murder, and also possession of dangerous chemical weapons. Now, he says, Free Palestine, kill the Zionists. The story is an update. Yesterday we said, look, any kind of hate or terror is unacceptable. And the people who were protesting, they have this weekly demonstration, run for our lives, run for their lives. And they were protesting, in defense of the 58, 54 Israelis who are still hostages in Gaza, in the custody of Hamas. So that was the problem. But, then this happened. I think that we should just say that hate is not accepted. The law should be allowed to run its course. I think that's the basic thing on that particular matter.
Righty. Well, thank you all for your submissions on the World Brief. Let's move on to newspaper headlines. As ever, we begin with the front page of This Day. And This Day does lead with the presidency saying that the 36 international trips across Africa, Asia, Europe, and the Middle East embarked upon by President Bola Ahmed Tinubu since he assumed office 2 years ago have yielded over $50 billion in foreign direct investment to Nigeria. The presidency also says that there are more trips to come as additional visits have been approved for the rest of the year, all aimed at engaging, deepening, and strengthening Nigeria's bilateral relations with other countries. Moving on to the New Telegraph, it says that the insecurity in Benue State, that is what it's leading with. It also led with Benue State yesterday, but just to break up the stories, to the top of the page, they do have a bit that looks at the IATA, which is the International Air Transport Association, and they have projected that Africa passenger traffic will reach 345 million in 2043, which will more than double the figures of last year. Well, 2023, and traffic on the continent would grow at an average annual rate of 3.7% over the 2023 to 2043 period. Now, the IATA also frowned at the cost of doing business in Africa, as well as the rigid visa access, which is desensitive, they say, to foreign investment. The IATA also stressed that costs of doing business in Africa is among the highest in the world, noting that it is too expensive to do business in Africa and that African airlines face unique cost challenges, particularly high operational costs, which are significantly higher than the global average. Meanwhile, it's Nyesom Wike's comments at yesterday's media parlay, which features on a host of Nigerian papers today. The Punch, the Daily Independent, and The Sun all take different angles of what he had to say to journalists yesterday in Abuja. And then finally, on the cover of the Vanguard, you have the Minister of Education, Dr. Tunji Alausa, talking about the conduct of the senior secondary school examinations by the WAEC Council and the National Examinations Council, and will now be computer-based as from next year, which may have to be reviewed, giving opinions by critical stakeholders. So there's a lot of back and forth about how best to conduct these nationwide examinations. Those are your newspapers.
All right, we've got no time, unfortunately. Thank you so much, Adefemi. Always a pleasure. We continue the countdown.